I'm Kenyan, came to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and currently doing my PhD in surgical sciences today. And today I have a number of people on my panel. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. I have seen some of them already on the participants list, and so I would like to introduce to allow Larissa go on to the rest of the people before we get started.
Me, would you like me to kind of do my introductory portion here, or should I just jump into intros?
Yeah, just do your introductory portion here, that's fine.
Great, okay, thank you so much. Well, hi everyone, my name's Larissa. I have the joy and privilege of being president of the National Union of Students in the UK. And, you know, I'm really glad to be here to be talking about, you know, how we adapt to technology to respond to this moment. Because, you know, the global student movement has long known how to win in an analog world, but I guess this is forcing us to evolve it and learn how to win in a digital one. And this pandemic has really forced us to think about how we weaponize those digital tools of continue to enable that crucial work at the grassroots so that we can collectively mobilize a mass movement of millions of students and young people. So you know, in the UK, we've seen some really powerful work that's been cutting through the noise, winning for students, building a better world. And some of that has been around, you know, harnessing the anger rightfully happening in relation to the ways that students have been let down over the past few months, particularly, you know, and building things like political education spaces digitally that convey that all that's happening isn't just a result of a few bad decisions, but really indicative of an education system rotting at its core. We've seen digital teach-ins on Zoom, documenting and archiving of student rent strikes and occupations on TikTok, digital actions like mass emailing university management, or student unions hosting digital town halls, holding members of parliament and also university management to account. So we've seen a lot of kind of responsiveness to the context we're in to continue to win for students. And I'm just really looking forward to hearing how things are happening elsewhere and to being part of the panel. So thank you so much.
That's a wonderful introduction. Maybe for the next series of introductions, let's just keep it at, because we'll have an opportunity to explore all these other interesting things. And I'll also need to formally introduce what the discussion is going to be about. So we go on to Asanda.
Hi everyone. So would you like me to make my introductory remarks now or later?
Later, just state your name and maybe where you're based and your current position, and then we'll move on to the introductory part of it.
Okay, perfect. Hi everyone. My name is Asanda Lobelo. And I am a student at the University of Cape Town. I am currently doing my honors in economics. I am the chairperson of the Rethinking Economics for Africa UCT chapter, and I'm also the former SRC president at UCT. I am currently based in Cape Town, South Africa.
Thank you, Asanda. Gerard. Gerard, are you there? What is happening with the climate change? We have what is happening to different countries suffering from economic depressions. And therefore, I think it's going to be interesting to listen to how we as young people can leverage technology in different parts of the world that we're based in, but also specifically looking at Africa and how that might be beneficial for Africa. And therefore, I think I would then give this opportunity to Asanda, because so that you can go ahead and give your introductory remarks, and then from there we can go on to the questions.
Thank you so much. I just want to apologize beforehand and say that this morning I woke up with a bit of a cold, so excuse me if my voice is a bit shaky. But let me just get into it. So in thinking about the theme for this session, it really forced me to define what this moment is. And for me, the COVID-19 pandemic is a health crisis that largely exacerbated existing social and economic crises. While there were arguably heterogeneous effects across the world, and especially on the African continent, it largely exposed the haves and the have-nots. So this is important in the context of Africa as a continent, which is so desperately in need of both social and economic development. And I think technology is an important aspect of that process, but in order for it to have the desired effect, it needs to speak to these elements of social and economic inequality. For instance, one of the solutions that have come up regarding the delivery of private and public services alike is digitization. To overcome the physical barriers brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. And while it is important that people have access to these services, how do you possibly justify digitization in a context where electrification remains a huge problem in Africa? Even if somehow government were to get every household connected to the power grid tomorrow, how still can you justify digitization with an unreliable power supply? So this is just one problem, but there are many more that you can consider that hinder the efficiency of conventional technological solutions. And I want to propose a different way of thinking around developing technology that is adaptive to the moment that we find ourselves in. One that is context-driven and takes the account of available resources and resource constraints of even the lowest common denominator in our society. The COVID-19 pandemic is not just a moment of incredible loss, but it's also a moment of incredible opportunity. And I can refer to a pre-COVID example of M-Pesa, which started in Kenya. And prior to these innovations, traditional banking was and is still largely inaccessible to many people. At the same time, there was a rise in the number of people who had cell phones. And by using something that almost everyone had, they were able to innovate banking and make it accessible to many more people. And this is the thinking I'm referring to. How do we leverage what people have in order to build technology that speaks to their context and will be effective in improving access to goods and services and their overall livelihoods? That, I think, is the role of young people. Often the best innovations are not those that start at the top and filter down to those who need them. They're often not some big show of money and resources, but they take what people have. Economic issues will not go away in one day, nor will our government suddenly have the political will to do what they need to do. But it is time for young people to start at the grassroots level and do what they can in light of these social and economic issues. Let them not be the thing that hinders the efficiency of technology, but rather the thing that drives it. So in closing, I just want to say it's a call to action to the youth and students alike to reflect on the circumstances around us, diagnose the problems of our communities, and think critically and creatively about how we can improve our livelihoods. And grows, people see its necessity and it attracts the necessary resources to upscale. So the point is just to start, do something today, and if not you, then who?
Thank you so much, Asanda. I'll give this opportunity to Jakub to introduce himself and give his introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for me to speak on this year's Africa Students and Youth Summit Forum 2020 on behalf of the European Students' Union. So my name is Jakub Grodecki. I come from Poland originally, and I'm the Vice President-elect of the European Students' Union, starting our mandate from January this year, like the next year actually. And my main area of work is the quality of higher education, with a particular emphasis on quality assurance of it, the student-centered learning, the student participation and governance of higher education, and the digital education. So our organization, the European Students' Union, is the umbrella organization of 45 national unions of students from 40 countries. And our aim is to represent and promote the educational, social, economic, and cultural interests of students at the European level towards all relevant bodies, and in particular the European Union, the Council of Europe, and UNESCO. We are also involved closely to the development of the Bologna process, which is a stakeholder-driven process in Europe education area, and through its members, the ESO represents students across Europe. During the past months, the main part of our work was actually adapting the everyday work and aspects of higher education to the student rights of it, part of it, the reality and support in the crisis reality. And I'm looking forward very much to this session and had a chance to talk about the aspect of technology changes on the education. I was watching nearly all the inspiring sessions before, so thank you for organizing this, and we will come up with the ideas on our topic later on the session.
Thank you, Jacob. If you'll allow me, then I will go straight to the key questions for this discussion. And I wonder whether, Gerard, can you now hear me? Gerard, are you there?
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, my name is Gerard Musanganji. I'm from Burundi, and I'm the president of Burundi National Students Union. I'm proud to be part of this session. Science and technology is somehow inspiring for today's youth, for today's development, for today's challenges. Adapting science and technology to the moment is crucial and interesting facts to talk about, and I'm really pleased to join. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'll start with you, Gerard. Question is on what specific loopholes have been exposed by the COVID-19 crisis, according to you, and how do you think institutions of higher learning, particularly in Africa, should respond to this?
Thank you for the question. The question is how.
So
Can you repeat the question?
I can repeat the question. What do you think are some of the loopholes that have sort of been exposed by the COVID-19 crisis? And how, particularly when it comes to the African context, and how do you think the institutions of higher learning may be able to respond to these kinds of loopholes?
Thank you. What specific loopholes have been exposed with the COVID-19 crisis, and how should the institutions of higher education respond? Okay.
If it's okay with you, we can come back to you once because I feel like we have a little bit of an internet glitch. Once you're ready. Is that all right?
Hello.
Hello, Gerard.
I'm having some issues of connection.
Yeah.
But come later.
Okay.
Let me try.
Okay. Larissa, maybe we can come back to you. And my question to you is, how can our government leverage on technology during this pandemic period?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think in many ways the technological side of things actually lends itself quite well.
Sorry, let me just repeat. Could you could you mute yourself?
Yeah. Sure.
Yes, please go on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So regarding how governments can leverage, I really do think that now almost more than ever, is almost kind of a duty to be increasing connectivity between governments and those that governments respectively represent. Because, you know, when I spoke really briefly in my introductory remarks about the use of town halls and digital town halls, for example, you know, within the student movement in the UK, we've been particularly focusing on how can we get more students than ever to interface with not only university management, but also members of parliament. Basis, you know, we'd be holding more students than we'd be able to hold in a room or a lecture hall or whatever it would have been ordinarily in a physical space, because it's on a Zoom call and you can do that in an exponentially easier and bigger way in some cases. So of course, this needs to be paired with ensuring the rollout of equal access and investment into the digital infrastructure needed to make that truly accessible. And you know, we've seen the ways that the lack of accessibility has particularly made a further marginalization of those already at the margins, and we can't stand for that, right? We have to see this paired directly with investment into communities that need resources when it comes to digital access. But that, for me, is notwithstanding the no other, to really show people what participatory politics really means for students in particular. How can you be actively, you know, using social media, using the digital tools at your disposal to really build that interface between government, between parliament, and between young people and students in a way that wasn't always so physically visible, because it was easy enough to say, oh, I can't meet with you because of X, Y, Z, because of security reasons on campus, because we need to put this in place, we need to plan all of this. But when you're inviting them to a Zoom call, how can they, you know, put those barriers in place? It's much more difficult to refuse that direct interface with those that governments represent. So I think we found it quite interesting to find those opportunities to make that happen in a really tangible sense. Also, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to, as a follow-up question, to ask you whether, in your opinion, you feel like the UK government has made the deliberate decision to involve students within institutions like maybe Oxford and other institutions of higher learning within the UK in actively trying to fight the pandemic and also the other challenges that we experience in this period.
Frankly, I think the UK government have included very few people in any decision making, largely because of a kind of ideological opposition to anyone that is kind of critiquing the government's positionality right now. Particularly worryingly and particularly galling is the complete rejection of many of the recommendations of scientists within the kind of SAGE group and the independent SAGE group, which are our kind of scientific advisory groups for emergencies. And so I think, you know, when it comes to the government's inclusion of students, no, I don't think that has been positive. But what I do think has been positive is, you know, beyond government, kind of other parliamentary support and real resolve to engage with students at this time, and that has been quite visible. I would also say, you know, broadening the kind of scope of decision makers and folks with power, seeing university management held to account in a much more direct way than usual has been quite interesting. Able to pull, but also some real blockages when it comes to a government that is quite frankly so staunch in the concept that they know and can do everything on their own as an island and not consult nor listen to anyone. But I think that's quite a specific position to the very specific government that we have at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. So Jacob, I'm turning back to you, and I just wanted to get your opinion on how has social media been used as a useful tool during this period of the pandemic? And do you think we can even make more, maybe utilize it more effectively in responding to maybe the next pandemics or the next catastrophes that we're going to experience?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that when we come to social media, it actually touches all possible aspects and problems that this particular tool brings with it. So all the topics that we will be discussing actually in here are reflected in the social media in the bad or good way, but basically all the dialogue is also happening there. So before answering the question on this topic on how social media was useful during pandemic, it is worth to actually realize and remind on how big part of our daily life the social media became in recent years. So actually I was recently looking on some data, and I think like in 2019, according to Global Web Index, the Generation Z, which was born into dominating, is surpassing the millennials by spending 2 hours and 55 minutes. So when looking at the different parts of the world, the time on social media varies from like 1 hour 50 per person in Europe up to 3 hours 27 minutes per day in Latin America. So actually the trend is actually slowing down. So we might be a bit optimistic on how it's impacting our daily life and how much time does it actually takes and how engaging it is, which is, I mean, a good sign. But then if we move forward, what is actually happening there, it's another side of the story. So that was 2019, and in 2020, since 9 months already, since 9 months ago, the crisis actually happened. We can assume that the recent situation might impact the statistic for 2020 heavily. We will see soon. However, in general, it's hard to be optimistic about any of the statistics that actually will become available about this year. So through in recent months, we are facing an extraordinary situation for all of us across the world, like the ongoing crisis, being locked in home due to the lockdown period, the restriction, health measurements, health crisis, have put into a situation where we're very exposed also to all the content that existed in social media, both those which were informative and useful about health issues, for example, have mattered, but also the worse and worse news were hitting on us every day, impacting also the mental health situation on the daily basis. So it provides us the uncertainty on a daily basis. And this crisis puts intensive pressure on healthcare, economic, and social structures. It also brought commitments to implementing effective approaches for public health due to bold interventions by public health professionals demanding for strong leadership by the nation's governing bodies. But regardless of that, during the crisis, lack of awareness, knowledge, and preparedness put people and healthcare staff at risk. So the main dilemma was on how to ensure information provision everyday mattered in the outbreak of pandemic. So the dilemma was how to convey the information and at the same time reduce the But coming back to the good side of it, the social media provided many opportunities for the world and each other through the crisis. The pandemic outbreak, especially the early months, was a process of crisis management for everyone. So it was basically happening. Numerous examples of positive use of social media, which helped building supportive relations in the communities, in the learning communities. And for us, the youth and the student movements, it was visible that many of the unions gained their momentum since they were often with all the learners in their institutions. So social media was also a tool which in some cases strengthened the position of students as partners for governance bodies, ministries, and managers of higher education institutions, because we were the only one through social media who are actually available to reach them. So it's still not yet the best tool in the bigger sense as a social media, but they are certainly raising awareness on the issues. Yeah, that's a part of the answer that could be. There are a lot of aspects of that, and yeah, we can go.
Also quite interesting that social media, in a sense, particularly Twitter, is very fast replacing the traditional ways of disseminating information. And nowadays, even some of the major world leaders use Twitter to send out very important information to the masses. And so, yeah, I like the point that you raised, that social media has both very good and bad implications at the same time. And so, Asanda, I think I'll probably turn this discussion back to you and I'm not so sure how experienced you are with artificial intelligence, but I just wanted to know your opinion on what you think is the role of artificial intelligence in the delivery, and whether you think this is a reality, particularly in the African context.
Okay, so thank you for your question. And funny enough, I've kind of been reading around technology and education specifically. So I'm going to answer from that context, but I'm sure that the same would apply to health as well. So one thing to note is that over the last decade or so, education or access to education in Africa has improved vastly across the continent. And this has been really important. These gains were very much important in improving literacy rates across the continent. But what we're now seeing that industry professionals and researchers are like, how people have access to it, specifically on the early childhood education and the earlier formative years of education in Africa. Because many students do not perform as expected, and often service, if you relate it to health and clinics and hospitals, is also subpar. And so now that we have these things, how do we then improve the quality of the service? So if I focus on education for children together, and specifically in early formative years, and expect them to process information and learn in the same way when they all have different abilities. And I know of one organization, Teaching at the Right Level, which has done excellent work around this issue in India and in parts of Africa. But basically, one of the most important findings is that learning is most effective when it is pitched at the right level for those receiving it. And so in Africa, we also have a shortage of qualified teachers. And in that way, I think artificial intelligence potentially would do well in configuring educational materials to the level of the user as more information is received through, for instance, diagnostic tests. But again, will this be accessible to children who attend schools in rural areas which are largely understaffed and under-resourced relative to their urban counterparts? So this is a question, again, that we need to grapple with, is that yes, we are considering these technological innovations which would arguably improve the quality of education to those who receive it. But in doing so, is it coming at the expense of access? And so we must be careful not to create more inequalities out of wanting to improve these services. And so the truth about artificial intelligence is that it's extremely costly, and we may do well to consider other alternatives in improving education. And I've actually had to do some research about this topic at work, and I came across this intervention in Ghana, Ghanaian Girls Great program, where they explored distance learning by hiring only 7 qualified teachers and ran lessons remotely using projector equipment to a number of schools in rural areas. And so teachers who are already employed facilitated and provided technical support, but they were able to give students access to qualified teachers and personalized learning. And best of all, nobody got fired in the process. And so these are the before we jump on the AI bandwagon, what can we do with our available resources? Taking cognizance of the fact that access is extremely important in Africa, and taking cognizance of the fact that we do need to improve the quality of our services. So to sum up my response, I said maybe AI in the future, but not quite yet. Yeah, there are other things we
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Gerard, I'd come back to you if your internet is now behaving well, and ask the same question on what specific loopholes do you think that this COVID-19 crisis has sort of exposed, and how you think we should respond to those?
Thank you. The outbreak of